Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell was of low social status, but made his way up through the ranks in the service of Thomas Wolsey. After Wolsey's fall, Cromwell became a Member of Parliament, where he used his intelligence and international experience to get the attention of the king. Henry made Cromwell Privy Councillor in 1531, and he became a close advisor, confidant, and like-minded reformer for the king. From 1532 on, Cromwell was the principal force behind the English Reformation. He became Vice-Regent for spiritual matters in 1534. This allowed him to dictate policy and finance to the entire clergy. He was also charged with reforming monasteries. Cromwell's biggest error happened when he advised Henry to marry his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, shortly after the death of Jane Seymour in late 1539. Henry disliked Anne and never forgave him for getting him into this marriage. Despite a brief upswing in his relationship with Henry in early 1540, by June, Cromwell was accused of treason and heresy. He was condemned to die without a trial and beheaded on the 28th of July, 1540. Edward Stafford. Edward Stafford, 3rd Duke of Buckingham, and his family found favour during the reign of Henry VII. Under Henry VIII, Stafford held the position of Lord High Constable and Lord High Steward. He served in the English army, was appointed to the King's Privy Council, and participated in diplomatic audiences and royal events. Stafford was wealthy and well-connected. Henry became suspicious of him in 1520. Henry commissioned an investigation into allegations that Stafford claimed he sought to overthrow the king. The king himself interrogated witnesses in 1521, and Stafford was put on trial for treason in May of that year. He was accused of listening to prophecies of the king's death and of his own succession to the crown. The 17 peers who heard the case found Stafford guilty, and he was sentenced to death. He was beheaded at Tower Hill on May 17th, 1521. George Boleyn. George, the brother of Henry VIII's second wife, Anne Boleyn, was in royal favour for the first part of the 1530s. He received several offices with his father after the king married Anne, and was sent overseas several times as a diplomat. Unfortunately for the Boleyns, the relationship between Henry and Anne soured, and the family suffered as a result. In 1536, George and 4 others were arrested on charges of having relations with the Queen. George stood trial for incest, adultery and treason on May 15th, was found guilty and executed by beheading 2 days later at Tower Hill. Anne was executed on the 19th for her supposed part in the affairs. Thomas Culpeper. Thomas and Francis Derham were both executed for the same reason: adultery with Queen Catherine Howard, Henry's 4th wife. Thomas was a favourite of Henry. He was from a prominent family and was a cousin to both Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Catherine and Thomas repeatedly met in private, and according to a letter that Queen Catherine sent Culpeper, he remained the object of her love and affection. Thomas was tried as a traitor in December 1541. Because of his status and former service to the king, he was granted death by beheading, rather than the usual hung, drawn and quartering. Thomas Darcy. He was extremely loyal to the king, but was a devout Catholic. Henry was concerned about his loyalties. Henry kept Darcy in London for the first part of the 1530s, perhaps by force at times. It appears that Henry had good reason to be concerned, because Thomas was engaged in correspondence with rebellion leader Robert Aske, as well as the ambassador to the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Darcy favoured rebellion and joined the Pilgrimage of Grace when he returned to the north in 1536. He was actually pardoned in January of 1537, but after it was discovered he was still corresponding with Aske about rebelling against the king, he was arrested for treason and held at the Tower of London. He was convicted and beheaded, and his head was put on display on Tower Bridge. John Hussey. In 1537, John was arrested for treason with Thomas Darcy. He allegedly had ties to Darcy's rebellion in Lincolnshire. At his trial, he pled not guilty and was offered his freedom if he turned on the other conspirators, but he refused and was executed. Thomas Wolsey. He died of natural causes, but he most likely would have been executed had he lived long enough. He held numerous church and governmental positions under Henry VIII, actively reformed both and took part in international diplomacy. He was Lord Chancellor from 1515 until 1529 and held an immense amount of power, wealth and influence. Henry needed Wolsey to use his connections to Rome to secure an annulment of his marriage to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, so he could marry Anne Boleyn. Wolsey was unable to do so and was dismissed as Lord Chancellor in 1529. He was later arrested on charges of treason and was taken into custody in northern England. He died on his way to London on November 29th, 1530. Francis Weston. Along with Henry Norris, Mark Smeaton and William Brereton, he was accused of adultery with Anne Boleyn. He was active at Henry VIII's court from a young age, playing games with the king and gaining popularity. In the early 1530s, he became a member of the Privy Chamber and had frequent access to the king. After the Queen was arrested for adultery and treason, however, she made claims about Weston's flirting and he was subsequently arrested. He was tried, convicted and beheaded in May 1536. Henry Courtenay. He was a first cousin to Henry VIII. During the first years of Henry's reign, they were on good terms. The king became increasingly paranoid and threatened by potential challenges to his throne. As the king's cousin, Courtenay came under suspicion as part of what became known as the Exeter conspiracy. He was arrested for treason in November 1538 and tried at Westminster. He was convicted and beheaded in December. Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church to marry Anne, despite producing a healthy baby girl, Elizabeth. Anne failed to provide a living male heir, and this was the beginning of the end for her and her family's streak of good luck. On the 2nd of May 1536, Anne was arrested on charges of adultery, incest and treason. She was taken to the Tower of London by barge. On the 19th of May 1536, Anne Boleyn made her last journey from the rooms in the Tower of London to her place of execution. She gave a speech, then knelt upright in the French style of execution. Her final prayer consisted of her repeating, "Jesus, receive my soul. O Lord God, have pity on my soul." The execution consisted of a single sword stroke. Thomas More. He was an Oxford-trained lawyer who once considered becoming a monk. His political career as secretary and advisor to Henry VIII led to him becoming a close confidant of the king. He served as a foreign diplomat and was knighted in 1521, all the while earning a reputation as a scholar. He was a devout Catholic and actively wrote against heresy and in defence of orthodoxy. In 1529, he became Lord Chancellor as Henry continued his efforts to divorce Catherine of Aragon. As an avid defender of Catholicism, Thomas persecuted heretics as Lord Chancellor. He refused to sign a request to the Pope for Henry's divorce and disagreed with the king over heresy laws. And when Henry declared himself to be head of the newly created Church of England, Thomas resigned his chancellorship. He also refused to take the oath of acknowledging Henry as the head of the English Church. He was arrested, put on trial for treason, and condemned to death in 1535. He was beheaded on July the 6th at Tower Hill. Margaret Pole. She was the daughter of George, Duke of Clarence, and Isabel Neville, and Henry VIII called her aunt. Margaret was one of two women in 16th century England to be a peeress in her own right, with no titled husband. In 1538, various members of the Pole family were arrested on charges of treason and taken to the Tower of London. Cromwell ordered a search of her home and produced a tunic bearing the 5 wounds of Christ, symbolising Margaret's support for Catholicism. On the morning of the 27th of May 1541, after 2 years of imprisonment as a traitor in the Tower of London, the now frail 67-year-old was told she was to die within the hour. She proudly refused to lay her head on the block and was dragged to it and forced down. As she struggled, the inexperienced executioner, described as a wretched and blundering youth, struck his first blow and made a gash in her shoulder rather than her neck. 10 additional blows were required to complete the execution. Robert Aske. He headed the Pilgrimage of Grace, a large-scale protest against Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell's policies in reaction to the decisions to dissolve all of the monasteries in England. Robert became the leader of the rebellion that took shape in Yorkshire. He was given safe passage to London to negotiate terms with the king. He met with Henry and advisers in December 1536, but tensions remained high and rebellions rose up again in January 1537. The king went against his word and ordered his men to arrest Aske. He was taken to London in February with other leaders of the rebellion and was tried for high treason, convicted and sentenced to be hung, drawn and quartered. Nicholas Carew. He was the master of the horse for Henry VIII, served as one of the king's cupbearers for a time, and received numerous privileges during the first decades of the 16th century. He was banned from court for a time in 1519, but was restored shortly afterwards. He was a sheriff in Surrey and Sussex and remained in high favour of the king until 1537. In 1538, he was implicated in the Exeter conspiracy and was beheaded. Henry Howard. He was a companion to the illegitimate son of Henry VIII, Henry Fitzroy, from a young age. He was imprisoned in 1537. By 1539 he was back in royal favour. He received a stewardship at Cambridge and land in Suffolk. And when his cousin Catherine Howard was executed in 1541, he attended the execution. He found himself in trouble with the law in 1542 and 1543, imprisoned for fighting, violating Lent, and breaking windows with pebbles, but managed to restore his reputation. He was determined to assert his superior ancestry over the Seymours and bragged about his right to quarter the coat of arms of Edward the Confessor. The Seymour faction in court seized upon his assertion and lobbied charges of treason against him, as the arms of Edward the Confessor were only to be in possession of the heir apparent, and Howard's actions were proof of conspiracy to deprive Prince Edward of the throne. In 1547 he was sentenced to a traitor's death, hanged, drawn and quartered, but he was granted death by beheading by the king. He was the last person to be executed by Henry and was killed on Tower Hill on January 21st, 1547. Catherine Howard. She was Henry's fifth wife. Catherine was a young, joyous and carefree teenager. She began an affair with Henry's favourite male courtier, Thomas Culpeper. During the investigation, a love letter written by the Queen was found in Culpeper's chambers. Catherine was stripped of her title as Queen on the 23rd of November 1541 and imprisoned. She confessed to having relations with Francis Derham, Henry Manox and Thomas Culpeper. Henry was humiliated. Catherine remained in limbo until Parliament introduced, on the 29th of January 1542, a Bill of Attainder, and this passed on the 7th of February. The Royal Assent by Commission Act 1541 made it treason and punishable by death for a Queen Consort to fail to disclose her sexual history to the King. The night before her execution, Catherine spent many hours practicing how to lay her head upon the block. She died with relative composure. She looked pale and terrified and required assistance to climb the scaffold. John Fisher. When Henry VIII ramped up his talk of divorce from Catherine of Aragon, Bishop John Fisher became the Queen's most trusted counsellor. He advocated for reform in the church, but refused to endorse royal supremacy and openly stated he was ready to die on behalf of the indissolubility of marriage. Animosity reached such a pitch that there were even attempts on Fisher's life. He was called to take an oath acknowledging the legitimacy of Henry and Anne Boleyn as king and queen, but he refused. Fisher was told he would be charged with treason, but continued to resist. He was held in the Tower, and despite efforts by the Pope to elevate him to the position of cardinal to protect him, he was tried for treason in June 1535. He was beheaded on Tower Hill and became a martyr for the Catholic Church. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.